Hey everyone, welcome back. So I heard you wanted my Scourge Prime builds. Well, I got a video for you today on exactly that. Honestly, this weapon works best on Hero because of its lower than average crit chance, and Covenant providing flat crit. But I'll be going over a general overview instead of Hero specific today. However, that will be included towards the end. Okay. I'm sure you already know what Covenant can do. Some of these builds today rely on grouping to really shine, and I will mention it when covering those. That is also the only reason this Hero has Ensnare. Hero does not need Ensnare. This is for mechanics demonstrations today only. I repeat, I don't actually use Ensnare on my Hero usually. So how are we going to start this? Well, I mentioned the alt-fire support of Scourge in my previous Knell video. It's also super handy for Xymos, or anything else that relies on headshots. It also isn't relevant to using Scourge as an actual DPS weapon, so I thought I'd get it out of the way right at the start. Basically, when you throw the Scourge, it creates a 14-meter radius pulse aura that will create magnetic bullet attractors on the heads of all enemies. These bubbles have a 2-meter radius and essentially do something similar to nuke the heads of enemies simultaneously to give them a massive hitbox. Awesome for proccing the Death Knell passive consistently, or Xymos easier headshots, and the likelihood secondary projectiles also hitting heads and anything else that would really benefit from headshots. But it also completely disables the use of Scourge while it is thrown and does no damage during the pulse, so we aren't going to be using that today. The pulses are also completely unaffected by mods of any kind. The radius ignores Prime Firestorm. Reload and fire rate have no impact on pulse frequency or how long Scourge stays thrown naturally. You either pick it up manually by running over it, or after 20 seconds it will return automatically. It will reload 33% of the magazine per second while thrown. The throw does have a 7-meter AoE mini explosion and direct impact damage, but it's useless, so we will ignore that. Alright, so what if you actually use it as a weapon? Well, I got 4 builds for you today to look at, so let's run through this quickly. If you use Scourge as an actual DPS weapon, I would strongly recommend first, bringing Arcane Acceleration, and 2, Arcane Avenger. Avenger is extremely important to the effective DPS of this weapon because it can auto-crit properly without it. You'd pair this with a Combat Discipline aura as well, usually rank 0 to not damage yourself too much, but if it's a frame with lifesteal, such as Hero, you can go max rank. Every build I look at today will have this frame setup used. Ensnare, like I said, will be used where appropriate and also as an equalizer comparison for setups that don't rely on it. The Scourge Prime is a decent upgrade over the vanilla. It has slightly faster reload, and the base damage was bumped up a bit on both the shot and mini AoE for 12% more base damage. But perhaps the most underappreciated change are the crit stats. The crit chance was increased from 2 to 10%. 10% is enough to be crit viable, especially now that we have galvanized crit chance mods and Avengers in play to push things towards 100. The crit multiplier is 2.0, which is a massive upgrade, doubling the gap between crits and non-crits compared to before. Though the status chance wasn't buffed, this isn't an issue you'll soon see. Build 1. This is a standard corrosive build. The Scourge is innate corrosive, meaning it is one of the few weapons where corrosive and viral can exist on the same build. I'm not building base damage on the weapon because we're sourcing it from primary Deadhead. Not only does Deadhead have long-lasting stacks that will be easy to build since we're going raw damage corrosive for headshot kills, but it also lowers the recoil on Scourge and also granting a bonus headshot multiplier to further push our DPS. But what you may not know is this galvanized aptitude. This thing here. This thing works like Eclipse on Scourge and Scourge Prime. So every status effect we get will massively improve our total damage since it will be a final 80% multiplier per status effect present. This also means primers are key for Scourge scaling further because Scourge innately can only inflict 2 status effects as a DPS weapon. Corrosive and viral together are still very powerful though, reducing enemy armor temporarily by 80%, ignoring 75% of said armor for the corrosive damage and 75% more damage if it's against ferrite armor specifically, and also multiplying your damage by up to 4.25 times with max viral stacks. Because Scourge has a mini AoE, it will be easier to prime nearby enemies with viral while dealing with crowds. Essentially, Scourge Prime benefits best from higher spawn densities, so Steel Path survival. Grouping is best, but not mandatory on the first builds we showed today. The other galvanized mods are pretty self-explanatory. Galvanized Scope adds another 32% final crit chance to this 30% with the critical delay and is enough to surpass 100 for all crits when Avenger is active, massively inflating your total damage output. Vital Sense to scale into these crits, and Primed Bane for 55% extra final damage. If you don't want to slot this, I'd recommend Viral Acceleration instead, since we aren't creating dots to double dip the Bane. The two mods to make Viral Pusher status alongside Galvanize to 90%, you will instantly cap out Corrosive and Viral stacks against enemies, getting on average 3 procs of both Corrosive and Viral every 2 shots consumed. And Vigilante supplies for token crit enhancement. How does it look? Well, you just point at heads and shoots. There really isn't anything special going on here, just a generic rifle. You can kill enemies even without primary deadhead stacks at the start due to the raw power of Corrosive and the Viral advantage. Once you have it built up and also have the multiplicative Galvanize aptitude applying, your damage will skyrocket. You'll be able to one-shot these corrupted heavy gunners. The problem is, because the gun seal only buffs the direct hits and not the AoE, and the weapon has no punch through, it is still just a single target weapon in the end. So it will require on average at least 1 shot to kill each gunner because the AoE just tickles. You could give up one of the crit mods for Shred to get punched through, but then you will lose your consistent crits. It's really up to you. In theory, Shred should result in better KPS, but that is still just a raw damage crit stick with moderate scaling. The base damage of the weapon isn't anything impressive, and the amount of crit support it requires relegates it to the very viable category for Steel Path, but nothing amazing despite the fact it having Eclipse scaling on its gun CO. Now for build 2, there is a variant I set up with Hunter Munitions instead of Galvanized Crosshairs mod. This technically allows it to have infinite scaling since Slash bypasses armor completely, and the Viral will also fuel into multiplying procs. We chose to get rid of Crosshairs instead of the other crit chance mod because Slash will prevent you from getting headshot kills. The innate Corrosive means you will still be able to shred fodder without having to rely on slash ticks though. This build suffers the same problem as the previous with no punch through, severely limiting its KPS. But what this build does have is infinite scaling through slash, so if you weren't as reliant on KPS, this build is definitely more viable for level camp setups than the previous build. But because the KPS isn't as high, you would either need another weapon to support Scourge KPS, or be in a squad. Otherwise, you might have life support problems if you're going for survival instead of disruption. The Primed Bane is more important on this build because it double dips on bleeds for 2.4 times more damage, which will be most of your damage and endurance. We also are opting for primary Merciless instead due to more kills coming from Slash later onwards, meaning you will not be able to reliably proc Deadhead as the levels go up. Though this does also benefit the reload, cutting it down to 1.7 seconds. Vigilante supplies again for the extra crit tiering. The build only reaches 75% even with Avenger, so you're giving up a fair amount of burst damage for infinite scaling and sustained DPS. Although the fire rate is enough to be worth it, the double dip Bane does make up a little bit for the crit consistency loss as well. There really is no way to fit Shred on this build, so I'm very iffy on it. Test time? As I predicted, I found this build was actually worse for KPS because more of your damage comes from bleeds, meaning you have to wait out the ticks for them to die since you don't have as strong crits for raw corrosive from earlier. It still does work in killing enemies effectively, but it's noticeably worse in the first build in how it uses 25 to 30 ammo to kill these 20 corrupted heavy gunners, instead of the raw corrosive build only needing 20 to 25, but if we were looking at level cap, it would probably kill faster than the first build. It's actually pretty consistently higher in ammo usage as seen in these tests though. I really don't know how I could fit Shred on this build at all, but in theory the Bane could be dropped for it if you wanted, though the results would still favor the Primed Bane instead. Now we're getting into some more unusual builds. This is a Gas Scourge. It's been a while since I've covered gas, right? Well, that's because most of the new stuff I've been working on don't work as well on gas or are noticeably worse than electric for the purpose I'm testing. But gas is back, and with the Prime Scourge has become a lot more viable. Gas does not scale with elements, meaning it is entirely reliant on viral multipliers and raw damage alongside crits. All of them were improved upon priming the weapon. This is the build I'm using where the 260/60 mods are used to create gas instead. Critical Delay has been replaced by Shred because the weapon relies on gas to kill, which can headshot and actually proc primary Deadhead just fine. Being dots, the headshot clouds will also headshot, a property unique to gas and electric, except gas lingers even after enemies are killed, which you'll notice is very important later to make up for the lack of elemental scaling. This also means they can double dip the headshot multiplier. The Bane is also here since gas dots do still double dip Prime Banes for 2.4 times more damage. Why Shred instead of Prime Shred? Because Scourge has an AoE component on its main shot. I actually don't want too much punch through because I want the main shot to detonate within the crown for the AoE component, specifically corrosive to lower defenses even more for Scourge. Humanoid forms take roughly 0.6 meters to punch through and 1.0 meters for quadrupeds. A prime shred giving 2.2 meters punch through will bypass through the entire crowd most of the time, losing you the AoE priming and bonus damage. 1.2 meters perfect because it is only enough to punch through across 2 bodies and stopping on the third. This way I ensure we form at least 2 sources of gas from the bodies of enemies at all times and 3 bodies per shot if there aren't any quadrupeds. This is a massive DPS increase because you are essentially building gas stacks 2 to 3 times as fast, and enemies camp out at 10 gas stacks, which isn't really beneficial for me to keep shooting the same person without punch through otherwise. This build also has galvanized aptitude for eclipse scaling on the mod, but you'll notice for once, we don't have viral on the build this time. Keep in mind, Guncio does amplify gas procs, despite them being AoE because they were created with single target damage. Nevertheless, this build actually matches and even slightly overtakes both the corrosive builds, but only with grouping. Of the 4 builds today, the gas one is the most mandatory in requiring grouping as gas does not scale with elementals. Without grouping, it is by far the worst option. With grouping, it is currently the best for base steel path and a bit higher, assuming you have the punch through to mitigate capped stacks. The electric build shown later has slightly higher DPS in optimal scenarios, but most of the time in base steel path and a bit higher, the gas one will win. For endurance, electric pulls ahead, but at the same time, I would recommend just using the corrosive viral slash build instead, which won't have to deal with armor. Vigilante supplies again for that extra crits, honestly because I would strongly recommend bringing grouping for gas, and thus a melee primer Xoris would work really well for that priming, and isn't absolutely mandatory to bring a Panzer as a result. You could opt for a Sentinel 2 to stat stake Vigilante mods for a greater stat bonus on supplies. Now let's take a look at that Xoris. Because the gas build doesn't have any viral at all, I went for a pure viral Xoris to maximize the extra viral procs we will get. Last thing sting is the flex slot. It extends viral proc to 12.6 seconds, but probably isn't necessary. Fill it up with whatever you want. Maybe more heavy windup with Amalgam Organ Shatter, or maybe higher viral rate. Maybe a third element for an extra stack for Guncio. So this Xoris currently only inflicts electric and viral on the light throw. Remember, light throw, not heavy. It has an infinite combo duration, so you should be building it up for 12x combo, which allows it to reach 132% status. It also has a 9 meter AoE, which is why I used it with volatile rebound. This also allows more viral stacks to proc, and if you want to trade less AoE for more viral procs, you can run Panthesis instead. Just keep in mind it only has 4.9 meters radius on the bounce to counter it having almost twice the base status. How to use the gas one? Well, it's pretty simple. You just ensnare enemies and shoots. Let's see how it works with our primer first so you can see what I mean. The biggest issue gas always has at the start is actually killing enemies, since we have no base damage whatsoever and you don't even benefit from elemental mod scaling, so I'd say focus on shooting some fodder first at the start of the mission. The lethality only really shows once you have the arcanes and galvanized mod stacked up. Once you get the kills, the gas clouds become significantly more lethal. Now you can group up and shoot into all of the enemies while spreading your fire around the center. You will stack ridiculous amounts of gas clouds and max them out as they overlap on each other and kill easily. It only took half a magazine or less. For comparison, let's take out the raw corrosive viral first build, because it's slightly out KPS the corrosive viral slash one, so we don't need to test that as it is only really meant for endurance DPS instead of KPS. Alright, the corrosive viral time, with grouping. And there we go. It takes more time to kill the group than the gas build, but only when we cast ensnare. So if you don't want to group, just stick to the corrosive viral setup, and add the 100 munitions as shown in the second build if you want to go endurance. But if you do want to group, gas offers a lot of potential here. Also, notice we didn't use a primer for gas. The corrosive build is self-priming because it has viral on it, and gives a massive multiplier by maxing them. Even if you bring Xoris, the viral is already there, but for the gas build, we don't innately have viral, so bringing Xoris is a massive improvement on our DPS. Because not only are we bringing 2 more status effects for Guncio eclipse scaling, but also actually benefiting from previously absent viral procs. It now only takes about 10 ammo to kill them all off if you use Xoris. For the 4th and final build, the one that I mentioned, the electric setup, this one is simpler to use than gas. It has more upfront damage and can still kill single enemies even without grouping. Albeit it is slower than the corrosive build for that. Compared to the gas build, we can get electric with a single mod. So in the spare slot, I put critical delay on again, as it allows us to surpass 100% crit chance when Avenger is up. Shred is still here for the same reason, so that we can proc electric on multiple enemies at once with the main shot, while still creating AoE corrosive strip that wouldn't work with primed Shred due to punching past the entire crowd. Galvanized Aptitude once again still works with the clips here, and Primed Bane double dips the dots. Electric procs, like I said, can also headshot, which will double dip headshot multipliers, and the reason why we equipped Primary Deadhead once again for the extra 30% headshot damage, longer lasting stacks, and recoil reduction. If you want more electric weight and mod scaling, you can go back to the gas build type where we don't run critical delay, but run both electric mods instead. Stormbringer and High Voltage. This build still pulls slightly ahead or similar to the first corrosive build, but with one caveat. Electric stacks are uncapped, so if you make a group of enemies large enough, like even larger than what you see here, this build in theory can surpass even the gas setup. The only issue is, for electric to really shine, you want high alpha burst damage to hit the entire group so everything chains instantly and they all die. Unfortunately, Scourge is a bit more about sustained DPS, and as you kill things off with sustained DPS on electric, the channeled enemies will no longer contribute procs after they're dead. In comparison, gas has lingering clouds that continues to shred enemies apart and only gets stronger over time as more clouds are created in that 6-second window. Electric is still very good regardless on Scourge though, so let's test this build out. The overall performance is similar to gas in how it massively benefits from grouping. However, because we cannot burst out enemies in a single hit to get the most out of electric chaining, the damage ceiling in smaller groups is weaker than gas due to enemies dying off one by one. You can see this is because it is taking about half the magazine to kill the group consistently. But the damage without grouping is higher than gas because electric actually scales with elemental mods. The raw damage here though is still worse than corrosive for that purpose. Once again, Xoris makes a massive difference here since the Scourge build does not have viral on it, and thus Xoris obviously massively improves its KPS potential. Otherwise, it's more of the same. Electric Scourge does offer a little more CC stun on proc though, which is something Gas Scourge does not offer. But if you use Ensnare or Xoris, both of those already are a hard CC and added electric procs to stun. It's up to you. Electric Scourge is kind of a middle ground between the Gas ultimate reliance on grouping and the non-grouping benefits Corrosive offers. Personally, I still prefer Gas Scourge as Electric Scourge just doesn't have enough to justify its use for me and has consistency problems. Now, our 4 Scourge builds today were pretty interesting and impressive, as all of them could break Scourge in the correct scenarios. If you want to see what it can do once we bring Harrow into the picture for Covenant, well, I guess that is what this last footage section will be like. Obviously, this is going to have the most effect on gas builds, because it lacks any kind of significant scaling, so being able to force plus 200% flat crit on gas to get into red crit territory is honestly kind of ridiculous and will kill enemies near instantly. It also massively helps the electric build by noticeably improving the alpha damage of the electric hits, so you're more likely to kill the entire crowd at once. So maybe this will make the electric build actually worth it. Who knows? It's up to you, like I always say, but both gas and electric will massively benefit, and end up performing near identical once Covenant is in play. For the first 2 builds with Corrosive Viral and whether or not it can slash, it's basically just a stronger crit stick. You won't notice as much of an actual killing efficiency performance increase since you still have to shoot enemies one by one, as the mini AoE cannot headshot properly or kill, as there are no lasting dots to create a pseudo AoE, like the gas or electric builds have, which are also affected by gun CO since they were created with the main shot. But obviously it will make the Corrosive setup stronger as well. Take your pick and let me know what you think. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always as soon as possible, like I'm done with covering these and all the new war stuff. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? And that'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching and see you all next time.